Hello, everyone. My name is Christian. Welcome back to my hobby blog. I'm very excited today because I've been missing for about a month. I have not, had the time or the energy to do any YouTube. And so, although I haven't had energy to film, I have still been reading a lot of books. So, the first one that I read a couple of weeks ago was Stephen King's Wizard and Glass, which is book four of The Dark Tower. And this came out, I think, early 2000s. I'm not sure exactly what year, but this was a very surprising book for me because I did not realize it was going to be a flashback book, which is something I was not expecting. But I at the end of by the end of the book, I was really thankful that Stephen King took the time to be able to explain all of the very sort of unexplored parts of Roland and his original quartet of his two friends, who I can't really want. It was Elaine or Alan, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but uh, I really enjoyed that group. But I'll say the big thing that I came away with was thinking that this was my least favorite book of the series, but at the same time, it has some of my favorite moments of the series. And a lot of that comes towards the end of the book because we start off, spoilers for Dark Tower through book three, but we start with Roland and Susan, or not Susan, but Susanna and Eddie, sort of traveling, looking for uh, the sort of green palace that they have been told to go look for because they just got off the train from book three, my favorite train in any series ever. There's not really many sentient trains in fiction, I feel like, but this one was awesome. I loved them, as I said in my review. But I was really sort of disappointed because the first like 50 pages is this quartet of those three that I mentioned, along with that one kid I forget the name of because we don't really explore these characters much in this book. But we have the first 50 pages with that group, and then for the rest of the book until like the last 50 pages or 75 pages, and it's a pretty chunky book, almost 700 pages, we have a flashback of 20 years or so to when Roland is a 14-year-old boy and he's sort of put out on his first adventure as a gunslinger by his father. And he comes to this town, and there's a whole lot of raiding around, which I did not like in this book. I really loved, though, the relationship between him and Susan Delgado, and also the really big rift between her and her aunt, because her mother died and her father died, so she doesn't really have any connection in terms of family, except for this kind of evil aunt character who sort of is making her marry sort of the baron of the village, the lord of the village, and is very classic fairy tale type of storylines going on. I love that part. But I was really kind of uninterested in many of the characters aside from the ones I mentioned. I loved Susan Delgado. I loved her aunt. I loved the really creepy old woman witch by the name of Rhea. Rhea of the something. I forget what the full name is, but she was just really weird, classic Stephen King, weird, kind of creepy character. But there's a lot of waiting around. The pacing is my least favorite when it comes to the series in this book. But again, it has my favorite moments. I love the writing. I thought Stephen King really kind of explores so much of the mysteries around Roland in this book to where by the end of the book you really get to know who he is full kind of through and through. Is what I'm trying to say. And it was really rewarding because by the end of book three, I still had so many questions about his backstory. And this book goes into it really deeply. And there was some really emotional moments in this book that I really enjoyed. And I think that's what makes the rating, it kind of carries the rating for me because I was going to give this like a 6 out of 10 before the final 100 pages because the final 100 pages makes it worth the journey. It's not something like Insomnia, which is a 1,000-page book that is just riveting from beginning to end for me. That's what I felt. That's one of my favorite books by Stephen King. But this book in particular, like the last 100 pages, just really prop the book up. And that's why I'm going to give this a 8 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I'm happy I read it, but it definitely faltered in many different spots. And I'm very happy that I'm kind of continuing on to the next book. And I will talk about this book in a separate review, but I did read book 4.5, The Wind Through the Keyhole, which is sort of taking place in between book 4 and 5. My friend Nutty Kathy recommended that I read it, so I trust her judgment, so I read it. And I really enjoyed it. I'll have a full review of that in the coming days, but I want to talk about spoilers. I want to talk about the last 100 pages because it's something that I think is worth talking about. I love this section. Stephen King, a lot of people say that his endings sort of suck, but I disagree. I think most of his endings that I've read have been fantastic, and I see where he was going with it, and I always feel like he nails the ending in all the books I've read. So, spoiler alert if you haven't read it, but I really, really loved sort of the climax of the book when everyone is sort of hunting after Roland and his quartet, and they're trying to get away from the town, and the town is just full of really uninteresting villains. I didn't really care for any of the villains in this book except for Rayo, because Rayo has this magical orb that is able to kind of spy on people. It's kind of like a Palantir from Lord of the Rings, and it's really fascinating because she's able to sort of learn everybody's secrets within this town and uses that to her advantage and blackmail. So it's really cool. I love that kind of shit. But she sort of starts really going after Susan and trying to basically get her to become a sex slave, basically, for the lord of the village. And she and her aunt, Susan's aunt, is trying to make this happen because they want to be rich. They want to, have, a really good, life, towards the end of their lives. And Rhea, who has all these really fun animal sidekicks, she has, a snake, she has, a cat. I love the cat. I love cats, so that was a really fun character. And this orb sort of draws the life out of Rhea as the book goes on. And by the end of the book, she's just basically like a walking corpse. And it's really fascinating because this is not a good character at all, and sort of reminds me of a more severe Denethor from Lord of the Rings. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but she definitely reminded me of Denethor from Lord of the Rings, Boromir's and Faramir's father. And I really loved sort of the climax where everyone's kind of hunting after Roland and looking for Susan and sort of going to use her as blackmail against Roland. And they show up and they find the quartet and they find Susan, and they take Susan captive and use her sort of as bait. And they end up killing her in front of Roland. And it causes this huge sort of emotional moment that made me cry. And I really love that. That's the first time Stephen King has made me feel that way. And I thought it was really well done. I loved that. And it's kind of funny because as you're reading the book that she is not going to make it. And so as I was reading the book and I was starting to fall more in love with the character, I was like, oh my gosh, we don't hear anything about her because Roland just refuses to think about her, even up 20 years later in the series. So you kind of know that she's not going to make it out alive, but you don't really know the details of what her death is because all you know is that she's dead. That's it. And it's only been 20 years and she's in her mid to late teens. Roland is 14 years old, so, they're young. They didn't die of old age or anything. It's 20 years since book 3. So it's really fascinating to sort of feel the dread of this book as you read and read and read. And then once Roland finishes talking about this entire tale, this backstory, because we go back to the present of them just after leaving the train, the sentient train. They are going along this highway that looks very similar to, I think they said Utah or Idaho or something like that. And they find a green palace. And it's basically the palace from Wizard of Oz, which is something that is really heavy in the Dark Tower. It's sort of this overlap with the world of Wizard of Oz. And we have an Oz like character that shows up, and it ends up being the Man in Black, I believe. This is why I should have done a review sooner, because this is a thing that I'm still kind of hazy about, is who exactly this character is. Maybe I think he was maybe the Crimson King, which is one of the big villains of the series that appeared in Insomnia, who I loved in that book. But they interact with him. They do some poems, of course, and they sort of he sort of runs away at the end, and they're basically like, well, I guess we need to continue on to the Dark Tower and find it. So that's where we are right now. We have some plot progression in this kind of transition book here, but I'm very excited to read book 5, which is Wolves of Kala, I think it's called. And there was a mention of that town actually in this book, went through the keyhole. So I'm very interested to know more about the Wolves of Kala, but I'm so excited for this. I do plan on having a discussion within the next few weeks. I'm not sure when exactly, with my friend Nerdy Kathy, who has read the series multiple times and regards it as a favorite fantasy series. And I'm really excited to talk about the series with her, because I'm about halfway done now with the Dark Tower, including the side book. Because there's I've read 5 books out of 8, so I'm about more than halfway done, and I'm loving this series. It's not my favorite, but I think it's really rewarding still to read it, and that's like the main feeling I'm looking for when I'm reading fantasy. Because I've read so much at this point that like there's very few series that are notable for me, and this is definitely one of them, and I'm very happy to have read it. So I think that's all for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and please have a great rest of the day.